Welcome back to News 9. Now, begun over 75 years ago with a simulation of the League of Nations, Harvard Model United Nations is the product of years of gradual refinement. It is one of the oldest Model United Nations simulations in the entire world. Now, it was founded in 1953 when the Harvard student group that had been simulating the League of Nations since the 1920s decided to start a new simulation to reflect the new organization that had been established at the end of World War II. Now, every year, high school students from around the world attend the conference held in the US, China, and in India. Now, at this place, delegates basically gain insight into the workings of the United Nations and the dynamics of international relations by assuming the roles of UN representatives and members of other international bodies and national cabinets. Now, Harvard Model United Nations is an initiative of the Harvard International Relations Council, which is one of the oldest, largest and most prestigious student organizations at Harvard. The IRC provides unparalleled opportunities for leadership development and practical, substantive and business experience. Now, HMUN India 2014 had over 1,200 young leaders from schools across the world. These participants converged at the Hyderabad International Convention Center, which hosted the prestigious UN Biodiversity Summit in 2012, October, to discuss and deliberate the world's most pressing issues.
We had to defend the Soviet Union's stance of invading Afghanistan in 1980 and had to defend ourselves against the accusers of various other countries.
Well, you can congratulate these bright students and find out about their unique experience at HMUN. You can call us on the numbers that are flashing on your screen. If you can't call us, you can also send us a message, but do remember to put your name also when you're sending the message. Now, for the special discussion, we have with us the students over here. Let's start with, we have Jonathan here. Thanks for coming, Jonathan. And after that, we have Harsh. I'm going to get your names. Aditya. And we also have with us, all right, and I'm sorry, Mukund. Yes, Mukund. Anrup, we have with us Kiran, and finally Siddharth. Thank you for coming. And sitting right down over here, we have with us Anmol Mehta. Thank you. We have with us Rohit. We also have with them their teacher, the faculty advisor, Tabusum Ali. Thank you, ma'am, for coming over here. And finally, the last two students, Siddhant and Abhishek. All right, thank you all for coming over here. Now, this is very interesting because the moment I got to hear about this, during school, we always heard about these Model United Nations conventions taking place. We always wanted to go over there because it's something different. So let's start with the faculty advisor. What's this all about? Because our viewers would want to know, what is this Harvard Model United Nations all about?
Yeah, it's better if a student tells about this because they are the ones who are really participating into this.
All right.
So
just give us a gist before I go to them.
Okay. United Nations, this is about mainly foreign policies of different countries which they represent and debate on and try to find a solution to the problems. So it really brings in better understanding in the students about the world affairs. So it is definitely a very enlightening for the students to take part in the month.
Now, in your school, how were they selected? Was it did they have a competition in the school itself, or what was the criteria for their selection?
Yeah, we start this from standard 8 itself.
Okay.
So we have one what you call orientation program for the youngsters.
Okay.
We start from standard 8,
Okay.
and that is how we try to train the boys, and basically we have the older boys training the younger ones.
Okay.
So the younger ones looking for their advice, like where, how to win, and all those advice is taken.
What's
from
the
them.
age group that's allowed actually?
Age group starting from 12 also, that is from 7th.
Whoa, okay.
So
and
yeah,
up to?
Up till 12th, that is around 17 to 18 years.
So you have from the 8th standard, from the 8th to the 12th?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, let's start with you. I was told that you all were in different committees and you all actually won different prizes. Which committee were you in and what was it like over there?
I was representing Sir Henry Vane the Younger in the English Long Parliament of 1642. We essentially is a continual crisis committee.
Okay.
We essentially simulated the events which led up to the English Civil War. Now in a continual crisis committee, what you have are updates which come up every 45 minutes to an hour, and research doesn't really help here because you have to think on your feet to a situation which changes very quickly. I mean, 1 minute you're discussing a potential invasion from Germany, the next minute you have an economic crisis.
So wait, you had to take on the role of?
Sir Henry Vane the Younger, a historical character.
Okay.
So the way it works is you get a character profile and you research about your character, what decisions he may or may not have taken, his outlook on various aspects of, for example, economics or social or religious policies. And my character in particular was a former governor of the United States colonies, back when England still had possession over them. So personally for my committee it was around 20 people, but it was very intense debate because it was going back and forth a lot.
All right. And what about you?
I was in the DISEC, which is the Disarmament and International Security Committee.
Interesting, okay.
So the DISEC was a 400-member committee, which was a double delegation.
Okay.
So basically where two people represent one country. I was with my friend Mukund Sood.
Okay.
We were representing the Russian Federation.
So you don't get to choose which country you want to. Basically, even if you're from India, it's not necessary that you will represent India.
No. So what happens is you apply to HMAN and you give them a list of preferences. So they allot you countries on that basis, on a first come first serve basis, and also on the basis of who has done well in previous HMANs. So last year we had come second and we had gotten Germany.
Okay.
And because we had come second, we had gotten a big country like Russia this year.
All right, go ahead. Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, so we were discussing two agendas. The first agenda was the militarization of the Arctic.
Okay.
Now, since we were the Russian Federation, this is quite an important agenda for us. Firstly, because we would have gotten a lot of chance to speak, because Russia has a particular claim over the Arctic region and its resources. And since because of its geographic location, it's really important to Russia.
Okay.
But the committee didn't think so, and the other agenda, which was protection of civilians in modern warfare, so it discussed things like the situation in Gaza and Israel, where people are dying continuously, and then again in Iraq, where the IS, which is the Islamic State.
Did you all discuss the Ukrainian crisis?
Not much in detail, because that was more of an intervention and not much of civilian killings.
And in that case, we had Aditya Siroya and his committee. His
in
topic
my
was
committee,
humanitarian
I
intervention.
discussed.
All right.
Yeah, so let's finish his.
Yeah. So we had 400 members, where it was quite different for a Bangalore MUN, where you get to speak a lot. But since it was 400 members and Harvard follows this policy of fair recognition, I think the average speaker would probably get 2 times in a day. So now here what happens is you had to lobby around, convey your points through chats and unmoderated caucus, which is informal debate, which is kind of hard because convincing 400 people is really hard compared to a Bangalore MUN, where you just have to convince the director or the chairperson of the committee.
Oh, wow. All right. Nice. Okay.
Yeah, so I was in the Social, Humanitarian and Cultural Committee, and my agenda was humanitarian intervention.
Okay.
So the Ukraine crisis, all of these crises came to play here because since I was Russia, I had to defend how Russia had not intervened in Ukraine. They were helping Ukraine, so I had to come up with a defense for that. So what we basically discussed was of coming up with a framework for when a nation is allowed to intervene in another country and infringe on its sovereignty, and how the different types of intervention, for example, economic aid as a form of intervention, economic sanctions, economic relief, humanitarian relief, so all these different aspects. And again, my committee was a 190-member committee, and again, it was a very difficult, it was a difficult experience in the sense that you have to convey your points you get to speak twice a day, and you have to convey all 800 pages of your research in those 2 points a day.
Aren't you putting a lot of pressure on your thought process? Because here you're an Indian. Here we are grown up stating that we will not interfere in other countries. We will not do this. We are a very socialist country, peace-loving so-called country. But suddenly you are placed into another country as a citizen of another country, and you're supposed to think as that citizen.
Yeah, that's one of the most challenging and fun aspects of an MUN, because you are forced to adopt the viewpoint of another country. So you see things from their perspective, and you have to defend things from their perspective as well. So, for example, I had to for Ukraine and Russia, I had to defend the entire situation from Russia's point of view.
Were there students from Russia in this?
There weren't. I don't think there were students from Russia, but there were students from other countries such as Singapore, Mauritius, America, China, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. There were a lot of international participation, and you don't see an American representing America. You see maybe a Pakistani representing America. So it's there's a lot of diversity, exactly. So the aspect of looking at things from a country's perspective is one of the most entertaining parts of a MUN, because you you see things from another person's point of view, right?
perspective.
So you can look at things from the other side as well.
All right. What about you? Would you like to
Alright.
share? Because you were both partners.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we were both in the same committee, which was the Disarmament and International Security Committee. So it was a double delegation, as my partner previously stated. So you had 400 people in the entire committee, which is actually really difficult because in Bangalore, the maximum you tend to reach is about 100, 150 in a really good conference. So now for us to go through 400 people and try and convince everyone to join our block, so what you do in an MUN is you form a block and try to pass your resolution. So that is pretty much the most important part of an MUN. So for
So
us,
how do you do that?
so you have to, so you have moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses.
Okay.
And in an unmoderated caucus, you are allowed to move around committee and talk to others in your committee and try and convince them. So that's what we had to do. But except instead of 100 people, you had 400, which is really, really difficult because for us, it's a completely different experience. You have to go around to all the 400, try and get all of them on your block, or at least a majority of them. And for that, you really need to talk a lot and do a lot during those sessions. And I mean, regarding our topic, we had, as he said, protection of civilians in modern warfare. So now we had to deal with issues like USA, their drone strikes. So us being Russia, we were firmly against drone strikes. We do not believe in drone strikes being used for military purposes. And USA is all for it.
Now, before you go ahead, because now you base your principle, your entire argument on what exactly is happening or what you decide over there would be the best.
We have to decide our argument based on what our country, the country that we're representing, believes in. So, for example, in this case, Russia is perfectly open with the research and development of drones, but not against the use of, but is against the use of drones on civilians. But USA doesn't mind it. USA believe that it is okay to use it in a civilian-infested area as long as you are able to contain it and perhaps kill a militant leader, for example, from the Al-Qaeda.
If the collateral damage is unless.
Exactly,
Yeah.
the collateral damage is irrelevant to them. But to us, it is relevant because you can't kill an innocent civilian just to kill, say, a militant who isn't that popular.
Funny you say that because no one objected to what's happening in Ukraine because over there,
Which is
civilians are dying.
Which is why Russia is currently, fighting against the drone strikes, and Ukraine is a completely different issue because
Russians would love to say that. Okay, I'll come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Anurup Doshi.
Okay.
I was with my partner Kiran Suryanarayan in the Security Council,
Okay.
which happens to be the executive organ of the UN. We have 15 member nations. Since both of us were, it was a double delegation, we had 30 representatives. So what we discussed was extrajudicial justice. All right, it falls under three categories: extrajudicial killings, extrajudicial detention, and extraordinary renditions. Now we had to discuss things ranging from the detention camp in Guantanamo Bay to the drone strikes in Pakistan, right up to the killings in Chechnya and the CIA's rendition program, wherein they used
You
to
represented which country in the
the Russian
Council?
Federation.
All Russia.
Yeah, all of us with
So
the
basically, all have represented Russia this time around.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
in separate
Yeah.
committees. So what we had to do there was come up with a substantial plan of action so as to actually take into account when it is actually feasible to use extrajudicial killings to justify what you're doing. For example, in cases of Somalia, in other failed states, wherein it is absolutely essential to use extrajudicial killings, etc., to possibly lead to a greater good. All right, in the international community. So, as I said, being the Russian Federation, we ourselves are conducting extrajudicial killings in our country. We had to defend that, and on top of that, we had to go firmly against the detention camp in Guantanamo Bay, against the drone strikes in America. Yeah, so on
All
and so
right.
forth.
Now, before you all went, you all got to know that you will be representing Russia.
Yeah.
So you all studied about Russia. You studied about all its various international responses, about the problems they are facing. Let's start. I just want to take before we go into that. How did you manage to study that? I'll start with you. What all did you study to to prepare yourselves?
Now, I went to a...
Use the mic. Yeah.
Basically, the committee I went to was a historical committee, and it was a portfolio-based committee. I did not represent Russia. I did not represent the Russian Federation.
Before that, how did you all prepare yourselves? That I want.
Now, we had a month or two of preparation. We were allotted our country probably in mid-July. And since then, all the time until the conference, we had time to prepare for the different Russian stances. Now, suppose you are, as an individual Indian, you see at Ukraine, you think that Russia, what they have done is wrong. But at the same point, we have to look from the Russian standpoint. We have to find ways to defend it. So we have to surf the internet. We have to check out previous presidential speeches. We have to look up a lot of different aspects of what the Russians have done and justify it.
Did you all know which committees you will be into beforehand itself? So you could prepare yourselves. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Alright, but the difference was I wasn't a part of the Russian Federation. I was basically in a historical committee. It was set in 1789. It was known as the Historical National Assembly of France, and our agenda was to frame the French Constitution in 1789.
Okay.
Now, basically, in the 18th century, the French class had three societies. That was the nobles, the clergymen, and the bourgeoisie. Now, the events that were going on, there was social oppression, political oppression. Because of that, it was leading to the French Revolution. And we, as the delegates of our separate estates, had to take stances and form a constitution which would hold good for France in the later years. Because the constitution it isn't for an ephemeral period. It's for around 300 years, 400 years, for a lot of years to come. Right? And that was it's not as simple as it sounds. It takes a lot of different aspects into consideration. We have to take political aspects, social aspects. We have to look for the army of the country. We have to look forward to the different stances, its foreign relations, its trade policies. Now, when you have these a plethora of aspects to look into, it becomes very difficult. At the same time, you have to convince all the other delegates, 100 other delegates sitting in your committee, that your solutions are the most imperative to France, and you have to help. It will help it the most. So basically, that's what I did at my committee.
Right. Now, since you're talking about the French Constitution, secularism is very, very strongly imbibed in the Constitution. How did you go about that?
Yeah, we had, like I said, we had to look into a myriad of aspects. Now, secularism. Now, what we drafted in our Constitution was the religion and the state have to be completely separate, and also we would form France had been running for the past few centuries under an absolute monarchy. Now we had to change it to we needed to appease the people because the absolute monarchy was resulting in oppression. Now we had to preserve our cultures, our heritages, as well as reform the system. So what we did, we opted for something known as the constitutional monarchy, where the king is just a symbolic head, and which goes under, and it has a parliament under it, which will take the real powers and the decisions in the council.
All right, pretty interesting. We spoke. You both were in the Security Council. You were in?
See, I was in the United Nations Environmental Program.
Okay.
Now, my committee was a little different from all the others because while they had an extremely large number of people, they had a focus on making really good points that would basically strike the chair. Right. Now, on my committee, on the other hand, I had to constantly pay attention over a period of 4 days because I kept getting recognized. So every time I stood up, I had to make an impact in committee. So there was that pressure on me. So my agenda dealt with something that's created international furor basically in the last few years.
Okay.
It's the Belamonte Dam on the Xingu River. It's a tributary of the Amazon.
Yeah.
Now the problem basically is that the Russian government, they've seen fit to build a hydroelectric power over the Xingu River, which would basically remove miles of the voltaic ground, which is one of the most ecologically diverse places on the planet.
Yeah.
All right, just this one project, all right, a project that would not have created as much electricity as the world community, as the Brazilian government would have liked. Despite that, they've seen fit to remove the voltaic ground, like I've already mentioned, which would destroy around 3,000 different sorts of fish, including the hippocampi and things like that. Now, contrary to popular opinion, my committee, UNEP, it also had a lot of legality involved in it. There were 3 separate documents, legal documents. There was the ILO Clause 169, unless I'm terribly mistaken. There was the Indian Statute of 1973, as well as the Federal Constitution of Brazil.
Okay.
Now, the problem at this point in time is that the United Nations does not exactly have jurisdiction to go into the internal matters of Brazil. Correct. So I was always on this middle ground. There was this ambiguous place where I had to straddle what I could impose on the Brazilian government, all right, as well as what the Brazilian government had to listen to. So despite all that, we came up with a resolution at the end of it, and we effectively solved the crisis. So in the end, it was a happy ending.
How did you solve? What was the end?
All right. Now, the real reason, now the United Nations does not usually meddle in internal affairs like this, but the reason is most of the countries that are part of the UNEP, they are all stakeholders. For example, the Russian Federation. I think around 7.49 million hectares of land are currently demarcated by the government for the purposes of hydroelectricity. Now, the decisions the Brazilian government will make on the Belo Dam will have repercussions. It will sort of facilitate a domino effect, all right, that will influence mass outlook on the issue. All right, so now if the Brazilian government sees fit to ban the hydroelectric power dam, all right, completely, then that would be seriously detrimental to our economies, considering how important hydroelectricity is to the Russian Federation.
Okay,
so we were a really important stakeholder, and again, this is where we step into the role of a delegate. From the perspective of a student, I seriously believe the dam shouldn't exist. But from the perspective of a Russian delegate, or from the perspective of someone following his foreign policy, I had to stick with the Russian Federation and basically argue for the dam. Or I had to bring out loopholes in the legal system of the Brazilian government. I had to bring out, I had to basically like point out flaws in everything. Despite
where did you get all those documents?
Oh, it was a lot of research. I mean, we had like Anmol already mentioned, we'd started research like 3 to 4 months ago, and we had to first of all, we started on the legal issues. We basically had to figure out whether the Belo Dam had the legal right to exist. From there, I realized that the federal constitution said that it had the right to exist. The Indian Statute 1973 said it didn't have the right to exist. Now, the ILO Convention again said that it didn't have the right to exist. But in the situation of the ILO Convention, the Brazilian government didn't have to listen to them because ILO resolutions aren't binding on anyone.
True.
So,
right.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. In fact, now you heard what they have to say. In fact, we have with us 2 more guests. Let's start with you. Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Abhinav Sureka.
All right.
Yeah, I'm from class 12.
One second. Use the mic. Yeah.
I'm Abhinav Sureka. I was class 12. I was representing the delegate of the Russian Federation, and I was in the committee called the Commission for the Status of Women.
Okay.
And my agenda for the month was reproductive rights of women, whether they should be allowed such sensitive topics such as abortion in a country like, for example, where they follow Sharia law. What about countries like those? Should they allow abortion as well? Because in a lot of situations, like for example, what happened in Ireland, where an Indian itself had died due to the pregnancy complications. In those cases, should abortion be allowed or not? And such sensitive topics, I was dealing with topics like these, and as we should come to an overall conclusion as to what should be done with topics such as contraception, pregnancies and abortion, so that it helps. The committee was actually looking forward that it should be allowed for women at all cases, but then due to a few countries' foreign policy, that cannot happen, and therefore we had to come to a consensus where we believe that in 2 cases, and 2 cases should always be allowed. That is in cases of rape and other such cases, or in cases where a mother's life is in danger. And the other cases are optional to the countries.
All right. Now, quickly, I want to take from everyone what you worked on. All right. Let's start with you. You can use this mic. Yeah. Go ahead. Which committee you were in, and what was it about?
Basically, I was in the Historic Security Council along with Abhishek Shetty. It was basically discussing the Security Council that failed in 1980 to arrive at a resolution to discuss the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. Now, what happened in 1980 was that the Soviet troops went into, as soon as the communist government in Afghanistan fell, Soviet troops went into Afghanistan and tried to impose a puppet government in Afghanistan that followed the communist regime. They were trying to...
Your committee was on what?
It was on the conflict in Afghanistan, the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in 1980.
What was the... who worked on the intervention?
Yeah, I was in the intervention in the current scenario.
In the current scenario?
So
okay, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, so my committee was basically only dealing with that scenario in Afghanistan, what Russia and the Soviet troops did in Afghanistan. Now, basically what happened was that the Soviets went in, killing a lot of people in the process, so it couldn't be morally justified. We faced the challenge of trying to morally and legally justify the intervention in Afghanistan. So yeah, that was the main challenge that we faced. Basically, yeah, there was another topic, but we didn't get to discuss it extensively, which was the unrest in Poland. Now, Poland faced an economic crisis at the same time, but of course, the committee decided to debate on Afghanistan because it was more relevant and more...
Okay. Now, what was the take by... What did the Americans, basically the ones who were representing America. How did they argue about this?
Well,
Because of course they would have said,
they were constantly accusing us, and we had to constantly defend. For example, we had assassinated the president of Afghanistan. Now, they were accusing us of assassinating a head of state. However, we had to mention that, according to USSR, that the radio had announced that the Afghan political committee had instead assassinated the president, and we hadn't done anything. And another issue was regarding the legality of us intervening in Afghanistan. Now, we said we had a treaty in 1978 between Afghanistan and Soviet Union. Now, according to the article of this treaty, Soviet Union has the right to intervene in Afghanistan in order to provide political stability. Now, and also pretty interesting crisis updates in the committee. For example, in between, the Ayatollah came into the committee, and he announced that he would no longer allow refugees to come into Iran. So we had a refugee problem to deal with in between. And another interesting update was Pakistan, the ISI, was training refugees from Afghanistan to go and fight against the Soviet Union as well. And another part of the committee was it was in the Cold War. So basically there was a US bloc and a Soviet bloc, and there was also the non-aligned bloc.
Yeah, the NATO and the Warsaw. Okay.
Yeah. And so there were 3 different resolutions for the committee. In the end, we had to merge the resolutions to provide it. However, we had the veto power, and so did USA, so we vetoed each other's resolutions, and in the end, it was a failed committee.
This is what is actually happening. Interesting. Okay, what about you?
So I was in the World Health Organization. So, I mean, a lot of us already know what the World Health Organization is, but in this committee, what we basically discussed was the double burden of disease and child health in the developing world.
Okay.
So the double burden of disease basically includes non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases.
Okay.
So in a lot of countries, what you see is there's a simultaneous existence of both obesity as well as malnutrition.
Okay.
Right. So this is basically a gist of what the double burden of disease, and they include problems like, apart from obesity, tobacco and alcohol abuse, drug abuse. They all come under the non-communicable disease side. And as for the communicable disease side, you have, again, a whole array of diseases. And in fact, this committee was very relevant in a way because apart from the topic area itself, which is very generic, we covered a segment on Ebola.
Okay.
Right. So we did that, and we discussed how governments are going to respond in emergency situations such as what came up during the...
So what was your response to that? The Russian response?
Yeah, so, no, I mean, what we did is I managed to get a block with the entire committee on it. And we passed that resolution. So what it basically described, at least as part of the emergency response system, is how the government's going to quarantine it, how they're going to inform the WHO, how the WHO's IHR committee, which is basically its emergency response committee, what it's going to do, and how they're going to get back to the government as fast as they can with feedback as to what should be done about the crisis, so governments can respond really fast.
Neat. Quickly, can you tell us which committee you were on, and then next I'll go to you.
Right. So I was representing the USSR in the Historic General Assembly.
Okay.
And our agenda basically was the second straight Taiwan crisis of 1958. So basically what was happening was the Republic of China had broken off from mainland China. There were 2 basic governments, the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. The main ally of the People's Republic of China was the USSR, and the main ally of the Republic of China was the United States of America. So there itself you have two distinct blocks in the committee. So basically what the issue was that both governments claimed that both of them were the legitimate governments of China. So both of them wanted to rule the entirety of China, including Taiwan.
Okay.
So our committee basically dealt on that agenda. Also there were a few block changes in our committee. For example, the United Kingdom, which is part of the NATO, didn't choose to side with the United States of America, but instead chose to side with the USSR and the PRC, because they believe the PRC to be the legitimate government of China.
People's Republic of China.
Yeah,
okay.
the People's Republic of China. So in our committee, basically, we deal with short-term solutions as well as long-term solutions and how to solve the current crisis. In terms of long-term, we discussed intervention. Now, the United States of America currently had their troops in the Taiwan Strait. So we discussed intervention on a large scale. We discussed bringing about a framework for intervention, because as of now, no framework for intervention has currently been defined. We discussed signing a non-aggression pact between the two, but ultimately it came down to who is the legitimate government of China and who would represent the China in the United Nations. Because as of now, as of back then, only the Republic of China had a seat in the United Nations and not the People's Republic of China.
Right.
So basically, what happened in our committee was the Republic of China was recognized as a sovereign entity, and they were given the island of Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China were declared as a sovereign entity, and they were given the entirety of mainland China. And the Republic of China had its seat revoked from the UN, and the People's Republic of China had its seat included into the UN.
All right.
So that's the basic gist.
I'll get back to you. In fact, we have a Bengalurian, Mrs. Sureka from Bannerghatta Road. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, sir, I would like to congratulate the school for giving the exposure to the students and bringing out the best in them. This is a very new platform that we've never ever seen as young kids ourselves.
All right. All right. Right. Thank you very much. In fact, there you can see many of us would have wanted this particular platform, but you are lucky to actually get this chance. Before I come to you, I want to ask you, considering the fact that you've actually sat now in these committees and discussed, do you actually see things moving forward in this world because people are only sitting and talking, you have veto powers, blocks are set up, and ultimately nothing much happens? Who wants to take this?
See, the point is that I think in a way you could fairly establish that a lot may not happen today, but at least through forums like this, we are ensuring that the leaders of tomorrow are created. The leaders of tomorrow know what to do. And if not anything else, I think, we must realize that since it's at such a big international scale, it's not only us that are taking notice. At the end of the day, someone is taking notice, right? Hopefully they're going to see what we've done, maybe even be inspired by us. And if not anything else, at least, as I said, the leaders of the future are going to be ready to take on.
All right, fair and square. You're saying that the leaders of the future would know something. But again, now let me put it in the other way. Now, when we complain and say that nothing much is happening in the UN, now since you have actually sat there, set up blocks, argued, vetoed, now I'm sure you will understand how difficult it is for anything to actually proceed forward. Yeah. Would you like to take that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
All right, I'm going to put this in this way. Considering the fact that you've actually sat there, you've seen how things function, because we always come out and complain that nothing much is happening in the United Nations.
Right, yeah.
We say that the UN is myth, but the US is reality. But you have actually seen how difficult it is for it to function.
Of course, there's the thing is we're in this constant struggle where we have to keep everyone happy. I mean, you can't keep both USA and the USSR, Russia happy at the same time. Everyone has their own interests. Everyone wants their own interests to be met, their own needs, their purposes.
But in the end, nothing much happens.
Exactly. But I think the point is to reach a middle ground where these large bodies can come to a kind of consensus where, both of them are fairly happy about what's being done.
All right. So how was it dealing with students from different parts of the world?
It was actually a very good experience for us. We met people from Asian Singh College, for example, Asian Singh College, Pakistan, and they're pretty nice people. Cooperation is essential if you want to do well at a large MU conference like this, because you need support for your resolutions. If you don't get support, nothing happens. And you had to debate and put forward your point of view while taking in mind that they may not agree with you, and they have certain interests that they want to protect and defend. And so in that case, it was really fun. And there are also these social events every night where you'd have delegates interacting. For example, the first night there was a global village where we had to set up stalls and essentially showcase unique aspects of our country. And they also had India Night, which was on the 14th of August, Pakistan's Independence Day, ironically, where there was a dance put up by the directors, who were essentially the chairs from Harvard International Relations Council. And all these events really helped bring people together. I mean, you saw people, you meet these people for like 14 hours in committee, and then you saw them have several tearful partings at the end of it.
All right. Thank you all for coming over here and sharing your views. In fact, people out there now will actually know how lucky you students are basically to actually go there, interact on this massive platform of 1,200 odd students. Yeah. Fantastic, and congratulations on making India proud. Well, we have news and updates on the other side.